Hey, how's everybody doing? So I have a question for you. What do you do for a living? Yeah, my answer to that question used to be I'm an aromatherapist, master clinical aromatherapist. Now my answer is I notice things for a living. And I say that because, and if you're a guy, you need to be watching this too. Okay, so Clary sage, as the title mentions, is an essential oil, and it contains a constituent called sclereol. Okay, so I was posting about that today in Revolutionary Aromatherapy. It's a Facebook group, and so but what brings me to this is, again, something that I noticed. So years ago, before I really dove into studying epigenetics and the use of plant constituents at the epigenetic level and CYP450 enzymes and developing courses and studying the stress system, before all that, I used to use Clary sage because I like the aroma. I was using it because I know it has an influence on dopamine, and I have addiction issues in my family as well as Parkinson's. And so a nice release of dopamine is really very important to me. But one of the things that I noticed about it was that it would activate my tinnitus. I mean, like really enhance the tinnitus. Well, I've always had ringing in my ears for as long as I can remember. So, but using this oil is like really noticeable. So I stopped using it. Fast forward through continued research and really investigating, like I said, all those different, the different systems, mainly the stress system and the epigenetic system, CYP450 enzymes and so forth, and really looking into the different plant constituents. My whole process, everything changed, because I began to realize that you cannot use, not one oil is good for everybody, and we need to begin to use caution. Well, fast forward to the time that I was diagnosed with breast cancer a couple years back, actually the end of 2019. Then after I went through my surgery and all of my radiation treatment, I was placed on an oral chemo right at the beginning of the pandemic. And that influences, it's used for, it's used with, what am I trying to say? It's used for breast cancer that relies on estrogen. Okay, I guess they would call it like estrogen eating or estrogen feeding cancer, right? So that's what they were using, and that's what they gave me. But what I began to notice quickly after that was it activated my tinnitus. It would enhance it again, and I thought, well, that's really interesting, because the very same effects. So with the development of Revolutionary Aromatherapy through 2020, and then starting the Facebook group, I've begun like just talking about individual constituents, really beginning to break it down. But the sclereol has been on my mind because of this parallel. Well, what's fascinating to me is that sclereol, like I said in the title again, in vitro versus in vivo. And for those of you that if you don't know the distinction, in vitro means in a petri dish and grown, tested in a lab basically, and in vivo it's tested in a body. So when we look at sclereol in vitro, we see that it actually inhibits adenocarcinomas. Well, that's the type of cancer that I had and many women end up developing. So it can inhibit that. At the same time, it's also labeled a carcinogenic. Well, and that's when they tested it in rats. Now you might be saying, well, a rat's DNA is different from human DNA, and not necessarily. The reason why they tested on rats is because there is a lot of similarities. But the point to this is actually the difference is the amount of stress involved. Okay, in a petri dish, there's no stress. You just have cancer cells, and they can apply, an oil or the constituent, and they can see what happens, right? In a rat, you have, well, let's face it, a lab rat is completely distressed. The life of a lab rat is not exactly one that's very calming, okay? So the stress system has been activated. Now, what's, again, captivating about that is that the stress system is activated with estrogen. Estrogen, as we know it, is a reproductive hormone. At the same time, it is a signaling molecule that begins the activation process. So what it does is it begins to increase the release of dopamine. There's a parallel here with this oil, see? So it begins to release the stimulate the release of dopamine, which then now activates the autonomic nervous system, and then the whole stress system begins, okay? It begins to unfold. The challenge that we face is that scleral is not even a carcinogenic. So it really disturbs me that we're listing it as such, because the bottom line is it's not carcinogenic. What it is it's shaped like estrogen. So therefore it plugs into the estrogen receptors, and now it is acting like estrogen in the system, and it's beginning to activate all this. And chronic activation, which stress does when we're constantly, and mind you, I'm going to back up a minute and just say, reproductive hormones, puberty, menstruation, fertility, stress is not a bad thing. Stress is simply it's a mechanism for signaling the need to change the chemistry. That's all it is. Okay? So these particular things, like I said, fertility, puberty, menstruation, these are all, there's a requirement to change the chemistry in the body. So this is why estrogen is looked at, and so is progesterone, by the way. So nevertheless, you have a plant constituent that plugs into the estrogen receptor, and it now begins to begin to activate this. Now, the challenge that we face is that with the stress activation, the epigenome now changes, okay? And this will cause alterations at your CYP450 enzymes, and those are the enzymes in the liver, or those are the enzymes that actually do a lot of metabolizing of most xenobiotics. That includes both man-made and nature-made chemicals. So this is where they're metabolized, and the CYP1B1 enzyme is what metabolizes estrogen. If it doesn't metabolize it completely or efficiently, we have metabolites of estrogen that are now circulating throughout the body. And what ultimately happens is that becomes toxic to the system. Thereby, you now have an immune reaction that is trying to eliminate the toxin. This is really what we are facing all over the place, is these immune reactions are trying to eliminate toxins. And in the process of that, we begin to develop cancer cells, possibly, depending on the body. Okay, and those cancer cells are doing what? They're feeding on the estrogen that is coming into the system. So it's very, very important for us to begin to pay attention to, and don't worry, I'll get to the tinnitus in a minute, because that is the really fascinating part. But it's really important for us to begin to pay attention to the number of phytoestrogens we're consuming, and really paying attention to the types of chemicals. There's over 70,000 chemicals that have been identified as endocrine disruptors. Essential oils, you guys, have the potential to be endocrine disruptors. Clary sage is one of them, okay? I love clary sage, but unless you're using essential oils on a daily basis for health honoring purposes, you are unless you're using it for health, you want to be careful with what you're using, and you really want to use caution. If you are predisposed to breast cancer, you want to use caution with the types of oils that you're using. Again, clary sage is one of them. We don't necessarily recognize it as such, but until we can really hone in on stabilizing, I guess you could say, balancing that stress system, calming that stress system down, because it's a real system, using things like clary sage, other oils that contain anthiol in them, or anethol is how I would say, anethol. You want to be careful using those, because those also act like estrogen in the body. So being aware of that and really beginning to soothe the stress system, and being careful not to use blends that do include clary sage in them, because they do it does in fact activate that, and it can lead to things like breast cancer and prostate cancer and autoimmune disorders. Now, the fascinating part to me is really how breast cancer and tinnitus are actually related, believe it or not, because as I was writing about it today in the group, one of the things that I discovered is that there's a lymph system in the ears, in the cochlear in the cochlear, oh my God, the structure. But they're called cochlear fluids, more specifically endolymph and perilymph. Okay, these fluids actually move the hair cells and create the electrical waves that start to help us to hear. But in that endolymph are the very same estrogen receptors that are found in the breast tissue. This is what's fascinating to me. And so what tells me is that this is where our hearing really gets enhanced when we're stressed. And that's what tinnitus is an activation of the auditory system, because it's a signal that the stress system has been activated. So it's a high level of estrogen circulating throughout the system. So ideas for helping that CYP1B1 enzyme to help metabolize your estrogen better would be Roman chamomile, would be bitter orange. Those would be the two that I would begin with, because those actually support the use of, like I said, the metabolism of estrogen, and really beginning to helping the body to filter it out and not be at a toxic level. Now, if you take an SSRI, an antidepressant, you don't want to use the bitter orange, but the Roman chamomile is a really, really great start. And then again, avoiding things like Clary sage until you are actively using oils on a daily basis to relieve that stress system, to actually help dial that stress system down, so that the body is using the oil, estrogen in a much better way. So that was the exciting part. I get excited about these constituents, and I just cannot believe how linked it is. And here I've been living with tinnitus my entire life, as far as I can tell, never really knowing why. And people kept telling me it was nerve pain. So all these years I was treating it as nerve pain, and then come to find out it's actually high levels of estrogen in my body. Who knew? So, and I'm sure there is nerve pain, but the underlying root cause is estrogen. And again, that is due to the chemical changes that are being required. I don't know why my phone keeps going black like that. So that's what I wanted to share today. I hope that makes sense. Please let me know if you have any questions about anything. Also request to join the Revolution Aromatherapy. I am having so much fun sharing this information, and I thought I would do it here because I want people to have this information. I really want people to get the most out of the oils, because they are here for our benefit, but we have to understand how they work with our systems. Because, well, let's face it, if we lived in a utopia and there were no man-made chemicals, and we didn't have the financial, the political, the environmental, the mental and emotional distress, none of this would be a concern. But because we have all of that, and we have this amazing mechanism to keep us in the process of being protected, then we need to make sure that we begin to use these with a more complementary type approach. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Clary sage, it's an excellent oil. And there again, I wanted to say, with the hair cells, like I said, and the motion, that requires dopamine. So it makes sense why the Clary sage is actually really, really good for helping to enhance the use of dopamine and really encouraging or supporting brain health as well. But again, using it with caution until you're using oils on a daily basis, and then beginning to switch them out, because we don't want to stick with the same constituents at all times. So join the group, Revolutionary Aromatherapy, on Facebook, and it's a private group, but I want as many people in there as possible to learn as much as they want to, and it's for free. So anyway, hope you guys are having a great day. I'm on my way out to head across the country. I'm in Georgia right now, but I'm going home to New Mexico. So I maybe will take some, I'll be taking pictures and sharing them with you. Anyway, I love you guys. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you soon.